Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast daily for Monday, January 2nd. This is Bill Landis. Normally on Mondays, we do the Ohio State rewatch pod with myself and Jeremy Birmingham, but Berman Austin had a long day driving back from Atlanta on Sunday, so we wanted to spare them, give them a little bit of a break after covering the Buckeyes on the ground down there in Atlanta for their game against Georgia. So you're stuck with me for the Monday rewatch. Apologies for that, but we'll do a rewatch nonetheless. A little bit different this time, more video clips to look at. Similar to some stuff I've done previously this year. Wanted to get a couple of highlight clips from offense and defense, good and bad, to kind of illustrate some of the things that I thought went really well for Ohio State in the game against Georgia, because there was a fair amount of that. And obviously what happened to help that game kind of get away from the Buckeyes a little bit there at the end. We'll have plenty more coverage of the game coming at the podcast at ohiostate.rivals.com. We'll be at Roosters on Monday afternoon to talk more about it, to talk more about what's to come. We won't keep dwelling on this game, but I did want to kind of dig back into it at least one more time on a deeper level and look at some of these plays. So let's get to the clips of Ohio State's 42-41 loss to Georgia. Okay, let's start with some good that Ohio State's offense did. Ryan Day came in with a great plan, I thought, of attacking Georgia downfield with these kind of play action pass concepts, running the ball efficiently enough and effectively enough and with enough purpose, I think, to make these kind of plays effective, even if it wasn't a tremendous rushing day. I think the fact that Ohio State was willing to do it and stayed willing to do it helped set these kind of things up. And changing the launch point, I think, for C.J. Stroud in this game was important against this pass rush. Ohio State's offensive line, I thought, had a good day. Not a great day. There were definitely some breakdowns, but I think Ryan Day, Kevin Wilson, Justin Fry, everyone who had a hand in this plan for the passing attack, Brian Hartline, of course, did a really good job of helping set the offensive line up for success, and they did it a lot with plays like this. You'll see C.J. Stroud here fake the handoff, kind of execute a half roll as opposed to a full-on play-action boot like we've seen Ohio State do throughout the season, more oftentimes from under center or out of the pistol formation. This is obviously out of the shotgun, so it's a little different. But they executed plays like this, and you'll see one later that's under center. They did this from all formations, and it was just a way to get CJ moving, get the defense moving, keep the eyes on him, and then throw the ball kind of back across the formation. It was really effective with crossing routes. Here you're going to see one that's more of a corner route, so I'll let it run here. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the player who's going to catch this pass. He's at the bottom of the screen. Emeka Egbuka is going to motion from that side out of the slot to their side and kind of run down the right sideline there. But this is designed to get Marvin in space, and you'll see this is a zone coverage with soft coverage from Georgia, and Marvin honestly has kind of already won at this point with the way that he's attacking the leverage of this defensive back. He's going to get that player to commit to a more inside route and then use his considerable route running strengths and kind of put this guy on skates and get open almost right away. And then CJ, not every quarterback I think can make this throw. It's a pretty open window, but that's a long throw. And it's a big gain for Ohio State. And I want to say that Ohio State, the handful of times that it ran plays like this, probably got, 110, 120 yards. It was a major chunk of their passing offense, but they did it different ways. Here's one on a corner route. This next play that I'll show you here is a different kind of concept. So this is from under center, as you can see. It'll be a run fake here to Dallin Hayden. And it's going to be basically a two-man route concept. You see Julian Fleming there, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is at the top of the screen. And when Ohio State does stuff like this, it typically combines a dig route, an in-breaking route with a more vertical route. And I think Georgia expects that. And instead of doing either of those things, Julian Fleming does run vertical, but instead of doing either of those things, Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of runs more of a hitch. And I don't know if that's a read based on leverage or if it's a call. Either way, it works, and it's a different look out of something like this. I think, if you study Ohio State, you probably expect more of the dig post combo that they run a lot out of this. This is not that, and CJ hits Marvin on a little more of a sit route there, and then Marvin shows us after the catch skills, and Ohio State does get a break here. Marvin fumbles, and somehow I don't know. This ball's bouncing on the turf, and the only players around it are Georgia players, and somehow Georgia doesn't recover it. And I know people were lamenting some of the breaks that went against Ohio State in this game, and there certainly were some of them. This is one that worked in Ohio State's favor because I'm not entirely sure how Georgia did not end up recovering this, and Ohio State ended up scoring a touchdown later in this drive. But that's not really the point of showing these. The point was to show these concepts that were super, super effective for Ohio State's offense and probably made up a I don't know, 30 to 40% of the passing attack and the passing production in this game. And it was just a really well thought out plan from Ryan Day. And there were other parts of the offensive attack that I thought were really thought out as well. And I'll get into more of that here in just a second. But I wanted to start with highlighting what was sort of the bread and butter concept idea for Ryan Day in the passing attack in this game. And it worked almost every time because when you can have that kind of space for a player like Marvin Harrison or Emeka Egbuka or Julian Fleming, and a quarterback like CJ Stroud with enough time to execute these throws are just really tough to defend. And Ohio State made a lot of hay running plays like this all night against Georgia. Looking at some other things that were really good for Ohio State in this game, obviously you have to discuss CJ Stroud and his playmaking, especially in light of the podcast I did last week where I talked about that some. This was the best game of CJ's career in terms of using his legs to extend plays or to scramble and pick things up. He had a couple designed runs, some of them more effective than others, but that was never really the point of the discussion I wanted to have last week. It was always about what he could do on plays like this one, where you're going to see here a little bit of pressure coming up the interior, and CJ Stroud basically step out of a sack here. Like he should maybe be dead to rights there. And he's a big, strong guy and maybe hasn't always used that to the fullest effect. But here he does. He steps out of that. He directs traffic. And this is not the kind of play where there's a ton of green space there for him to attack. There's that defender there that's closing in on him. So he's his eyes down the field, and he's going to make an aggressive throw here to Marvin Harrison Jr. in the end zone for a touchdown. And he did this routinely in this game. And this is all that I think Ohio State could have asked of CJ. He promised that he was going to kind of leave it all out on the field, and he certainly lived up to that promise. And earlier in this drive, he sidestepped some pressure from Jalen Carter, who was probably the best defensive player in the country and was the best defensive player on the field in this game, at least singular talent. And maybe he didn't play his best game, but he's a super talented player. And to sidestep a guy like that and create a play downfield was a tremendous growth moment for a player like CJ. And he did it a lot in this game. And this was the kind of game where Ohio State's offensive line was not always going to be right here. You can clearly see there's some breakdowns here. And I'll show a play in a second where I thought the offensive line play was really good. But this is one of those moments where it got away from them a little bit. And, sometimes that led to sacks. CJ was sacked a handful of times, but there were other times too where if there were these kind of mistakes or breakdowns that CJ made his offensive line right, and quarterbacks need to do that sometimes. And maybe CJ doesn't always do that, but he certainly did it in this game. This is just a tremendous individual play from CJ to extend this. Good job by Marvin Harrison Jr. to make himself available in the end zone and kind of come back to CJ a little bit too. I thought the receivers were really good about doing that in this game as well. So, high marks all around really to these guys for creating plays when stuff wasn't there initially and making the most of these opportunities. It got away from them a little bit later in the game, but early on in the game for the first three quarters, it was really on point. And even late, CJ using his legs to scramble was obviously huge for Ohio State to get in position to kick that potential game-winning field goal. So just wanted to point out that CJ had kind of a legendary performance here. It's a shame that it's going to go down not in connection with what would have been a major win and one of the better wins the program has ever had, but nonetheless it was a performance worth appreciating from a kid who vowed to give it his all and play his best on the biggest stage of his career and did so. Getting back into looking at some of the plans that Ryan Day had coming into this game, the 2-minute drill that Ohio State had at the end of the first half was some of the best offense I think we've seen from Ohio State all year. And Ryan Day said, I believe at halftime of the TV broadcast, they had repped that a lot in case they had gotten into that situation. And it really showed. There was some good stuff throughout that entire drive, but this is the last play. And there's a lot to like here. Well, I guess we'll start with the design of the play. You have 2x2 here, or four receivers kind of spread out in an open set with the tight end sort of detached there. That's Joe Royer to the top in the slot. He and Emeka Egbuka in the bottom of the screen in the slot are both going to kind of run corner routes from the inside. And what that's going to do is occupy both of the two deep safeties that you see standing there around the 25-yard line, kind of on either side of that Chick-fil-A logo there. And both of those guys are kind of going to clear out the middle of the field, chasing the corner routes or keeping eyes on the corner routes of the two interior defenders, and Ohio State is just going to slip Xavier Johnson out of the backfield, get him isolated on a linebacker, and CJ is going to make a really good throw, kind of a touch pass over that defender. Xavier Johnson turns that catches it. He honestly probably could have caught it in stride, and the play would have worked out the same way. But it's just a monster touchdown for Ohio State. Think about the juncture in the game. Georgia right before this had the ball, had tied the game, was getting the ball late in the second quarter, knew it was going to get the ball to start the second half. Ohio State's defense holds them to a field goal rather than a touchdown. Obviously, no points would have been better, but to hold them to a field goal there was huge. And then Ohio State answers with a touchdown of its own. And this is a portion of the game you might hear it referred to as the middle eight. It's the last 4 minutes of the second half and the first 4 minutes, or the last 4 minutes of the first half, and the first 4 minutes of the second half. And oftentimes games can get decided in these moments, that depending on who has the ball last and then first in the first half and what they do in those moments. And it really felt to me at the time like Ohio State was going to see the game slip away from it there with the way that it had given up its lead, with the way that Georgia had been building momentum. I was sort of fully expecting Georgia to put a maybe like a 10-point gap between itself and Ohio State at this juncture of the game. And instead what it ended up being was a 14-3 advantage for Ohio State. There was this touchdown here to end the first half. There was a stand to start the second half. And then they scored with about 10 and a half minutes left in the third quarter to go back up by two touchdowns comfortably. And this play I thought was maybe the best design play of the night for Ryan Day. Kind of understanding what Georgia was going to give him, isolating a player like Xavier Johnson, who maybe you're not super keyed in on, and finding a way to put the ball into the end zone. But I'll let it run so you can see the end of the play. Xavier Johnson adjusts, makes the catch, walks into the end zone for a big-time score. But to go back to the beginning of the play, or the line of scrimmage to be more specific, Ohio State was using tempo, and that seemed to be affecting Georgia. They did not blitz much on any of these 4 plays where Ohio State moved the ball down the field effectively, but I want to shout out Matthew Jones here on this play. He is basically solo blocking Jalen Carter, and Carter eventually gets through, but Matthew Jones does a really good job of fighting off a couple of moves, kind of stalemating Carter for a little bit and giving CJ the time he needs. And CJ had a lot of time. He had like 5 seconds to throw this pass, and if you can get like 2.5 to 3 seconds, I think any quarterback would take that. So that doesn't happen though without Matthew Jones holding up the way he holds up here against Jalen Carter. So he tried a little rip move, he tried a spin move. And Matthew was really stout, and I thought he had a pretty good game overall. Again, not there wasn't a perfection up front on the offensive line. Maybe overall, DeJuan Jones might have been their best offensive lineman on the evening, but Matthew Jones had a great rep here, had other great reps, was good in the run game on some gap schemes where he was pulling, and this is the kind of stuff where I don't know if he's going to try to go to the next level after this season or not. He's got a decision to make, but if he does, this is the kind of stuff where you can put on the tape and I think feel really good about what a player like Matthew Jones can provide you, because he's probably still not 100% at this juncture either. I know he has been practicing, or had been practicing for a couple weeks after suffering that ankle injury against Maryland, but certainly not fully, I think, capable of doing everything that he's expected to do, but still kind of gritted through it and played what I thought was a pretty solid game. And this was a rep to note for Matthew Jones as he helped that offensive line play a good game. Not the best game I think we've seen from them, although given the talent they face, maybe it was. But this was a tremendous rep for everybody all around, for Ryan Day, for CJ Stroud, for Xavier Johnson, for Joe Royer and Emeka Egbuka selling these routes to occupy those safeties, and for the entire Ohio State offense to put the ball in the end zone at a time where it looked like momentum was slipping away from them, and they kind of stole it back from Georgia. Now we're moving on to the point of the game where things started to slip away from Ohio State's offense a little bit. This is early in the third quarter. This is the last touchdown that they score. So this is still in that middle eight portion that I was talking about earlier. But to go from this point with 10:30 left in the third quarter and then not put the ball in the end zone again is not a great position to be in when you're in a playoff game. And I know Georgia had to settle for some field goals too, and ultimately ended up being a 1-point game. But anytime you're not getting touchdowns in a game like this, I think it's a problem. So this is the last one, and it was another, again, good example of design from Ryan Day. Ohio State ran the ball okay in this game, like better than I thought they would for sure. and did so effectively to help set up plays like this one we're going to watch here. And I don't think when people look back on this game, they're going to remember the run game. They're going to remember CJ, and they're going to remember some missed moments. But the run game is really important to keep Georgia honest so that Ohio State can do stuff like this. So CJ Stroud goes from under center, fakes the stretch play to Xavier Johnson, who had to log a lot of tailback reps in this game because obviously Travion Henderson didn't play at all. Mayan Williams was clearly still limited and played sparingly. Chip Traynham was not featured very much at all. It was sort of on the shoulders of Xavier Johnson and Dallin Hayden, who I thought both performed admirably in what they were asked to do. So this run fake with Emeka Egbuka coming across the formation, the Ohio State had used motion quite a bit in this game. A lot of it, I think, was to help CJ kind of decipher coverage or maybe to get some favorable matchups. But on this play, Georgia just loses Emeka Egbuka, and CJ rolls out on a full boot this time, not a half roll, hits him kind of in the flat, and there's nobody over there, and he waltzes into the end zone for a touchdown. And Ohio State, I thought, executed fairly well in the red zone up until this point. And there were points later in the game, which I'm going to show here in a second, where it got away from them, and the decision-making down there seemed to leave a little bit of something to be desired. And it's where Ryan Day, frankly, started to lose me a little bit in terms of just kind of his grasp of how things were progressing. And they never quite got back to this point where they seemed to be dictating the terms to Georgia every time they had the ball. So here is later in the fourth quarter. It's inside of 4 minutes to play. Ohio State is simultaneously trying to salt away this game and also find some insurance. And Ohio State had been aggressive to this point, and it had served them well. This maybe is perhaps a bit too aggressive. I struggle with loving that criticism, though, because it had done what it needed to do to get them to this point. But I couldn't help but think of the way that Ohio State's defense operates sometimes when they do get put on their heels and Jim Knowles is trying to steal back some momentum. He'll blitz in situations like this. And Ohio State had just moved the ball down inside the 20, had run it pretty well on this drive. And Georgia's going to dial up a blitz here, I think, to kind of steal momentum back if it can. And Ohio State just kind of has the wrong call on for that. I think something a little simpler here probably would have suited Ohio State better. A quick hitting pass or even frankly just a run play because they had run the ball well on this drive to this point. But instead what they do is use motion with Emeka Egbuka, kind of bring him back across the formation, fake it to him. And I'm thinking CJ Stroud here wants to throw back into the flat to Dallin Hayden. And maybe it's Mitch Rossi, but I think it's Dallin Hayden. And that's a tough throw to make with that kind of defender lingering there. If you throw high off your back foot with that pressure, it can be intercepted. If you put it on Hayden, and Hayden's not even looking at him right now, so you probably shouldn't throw it to him anyway. But the timing of this play just gets thrown off. It's not a good rep for the offensive line. But I thought mostly it was Ryan Day who I think had his finger on the pulse for much of this game, kind of losing it a little bit in this moment, and perhaps trying to do a little too much in the name of being aggressive and trying to put the ball into the end zone. I think it's the right mindset. I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I think you do need to play for touchdowns, but I felt maybe this could have been slightly different decision making and ultimately still gotten Ohio State to a better place than it was on this play, with CJ taking the sack and then the offense having to settle for a field goal to only go up by 6 as opposed to making it a 2-score game again. And we'll talk about the defense and how it got away from Ohio State. But this was sort of the first step in that. Ohio State's defense in the fourth quarter was just not equipped to get stops, and the offense, while holding up its part of the bargain for much of the game, did not do so in the fourth quarter to put enough of a cushion between itself and Georgia that some of those defensive shortcomings wouldn't come back to haunt them. And just quickly, the last play here for the offense that I want to highlight is the run from Dallin Hayden in the fourth quarter. Inside of 30 seconds of play, Ohio State is driving to try to win the game. And I just don't really get why they ran the ball here. I suppose Ryan Day's logic made sense. He said he thought they could perhaps crease the Georgia defense here in describing them as playing cover zero. It's not really cover zero because there's going to end up being a defender in the middle of the field. But the middle of the field, or the deep middle, but the kind of middle portion of the formation is open if Dallin Hayden is able to find a crease, but he's not. There's just a wall there. It's a stretch play out of the pistol. And while Ohio State had run the ball well to this point, this felt a little predictable by formation, I suppose. And I just think maybe they could have been a little more creative here. And mostly I just don't like taking the ball out of CJ Stroud's hands in this situation. He had done so much to get them down to this point with his legs, was making good reads in the pass game, and they still got 2 more cracks at it after this. I don't want to dismiss that. The second down play was a slant that probably should have been caught. It was thrown in a good spot to Xavier Johnson. Keely Ringo made a good play in coverage. And then the third down play was another play where Georgia bought pressure and kind of sacked CJ before Ohio State could get anything going, and he didn't throw the ball, which I think was probably a smart decision given the fact that you need to protect it there and make sure that you still have the opportunity to get the kickoff, even if it's not from the most opportune distance, and clearly it wasn't for Ohio State. But this play here with 2 timeouts, which is really just more like 1 timeout because I think you want to keep one of those timeouts in your pocket for the field goal operation in case anything goes haywire there, just didn't make much sense to me. And I think these were back-to-back possessions in the fourth quarter where Ohio State got in position to score and didn't handle it as well as it should have. All right, now we're flipping over to Ohio State's defense, which obviously had an up and down game. There was definitely some good in this game, and I'll get to that by first showing a play that was not particularly good. This is a 21-yard rush for Georgia in the first half, and stuff like this was happening far, far too often for Ohio State's offense in the first 2 quarters of this game. It's just a split zone run, and you'll see Brock Bowers come across the formation and take out JT Tuimoloau. It's otherwise okay, kind of on that side of the play. But the problem is, if you look on the 30-yard line there, with Steel Chambers and Lathan Ransom, is where Ohio State, I think, finds itself in a bit of a pickle here. And this happened quite a bit in the first half, and just not being particularly gap sound. This play ends up getting out there between the guard and tackle on the right side, and it just ends up that there's nobody there to account for that gap. Lathan Ransom takes a bad angle here. He's got eyes on Brock Bowers because he has to go with him if Bowers releases, try to catch a pass. So that's a tough assignment. So he kind of takes himself out of the play. And then Steel Chambers ends up getting blocked out of the play by a 185-pound receiver, which you just can't have happen to your linebacker. And I'm not trying to single out one guy for what was one bad rep here, because Steel had some other really nice moments in this game. But this is the kind of stuff that was happening to Ohio State a lot in this half. Georgia's offensive line was just destroying Ohio State in the run game for the first 2 quarters, to the tune of 123 rushing yards, to the tune of Georgia putting up 3 touchdowns in the first half and keeping pace with Ohio State when there looked like there were moments for the Buckeyes to pull away early. The offense was, for the most part, doing its piece, and the defense couldn't get a stop when it needed to in the first half of this game, largely because it kept allowing things like this to happen. There was obviously the long 52-yard rush that wasn't a touchdown but should have been one, but ended up being a touchdown 2 plays later anyway. And then there were a couple of 20-yard runs like this one where it was just too easy for Georgia to get a big chunk against Ohio State's rushing defense. But I show this play to move on to this point now. And this is where it started to change for Ohio State's defense. I don't know that Jim Knowles did anything spectacularly in terms of scheme. I just think Ohio State kind of started playing better against the run and got some better individual efforts. So the key guy I think to watch on this play is Jerron Cage. He's right there in the middle of the defensive line, and he had probably his best game of the year. He didn't play all that much. I think he only played 8 snaps. Maybe he should have played more. He was really key, I thought, in Ohio State's run defense. And here he does a great job of holding up at the point of attack, helping build a wall so that his teammates can kind of rally to the ball, because it's blocked well otherwise. Like, you see Zach Harrison there getting kind of chipped and driven out of the play by 2 players. On the other side of Jerron Cage, I believe that's Teron Vincent, who is getting double teamed as well. That's decent work up front from Georgia, but it's better work from Jerron Cage to get off the block of the center there, and really good work from Steel Chambers to sidestep and defeat the block of this lineman trying to get downfield on him. And he's the one who ultimately gets in there and helps Jerron Cage make the stop. And this is what Ohio State started doing much more of in the second half, but it started here on the last drive of the second half, or of the first half, when Ohio State was able to hold Georgia to a field goal here. The run defense was just much, much better from this point on, and we'll let this run and get to a moment here In the third quarter, again, Georgia is trying to run the ball here. This is a gap scheme. There's a pulling guard and the pulling tight end. And you're going to see JT Tuimoloau at the bottom of the defensive line and Tommy Eichenberg just kind of hammer these pullers and knock them back and knock this run off course. You get a really good rep from Ty Hamilton there in the middle of the defensive line. He helps build that wall, gets off a block, helps make the run stop. People rally to the ball, and Georgia doesn't go anywhere on this run play. Georgia had 123 rushing yards in the first half. As I said, they had 12 rushing yards in the second half. They couldn't run the ball to the point where they basically abandoned it, which is a credit to Ohio State's run defense, but speaks to larger issues, which we're going to get here into in a second, which is the fact that Ohio State never really figured out how to stop Georgia's passing attack, and that led to some back-breaking big plays and ultimately Georgia being able to win this game. And that brings us to pass defense, which was obviously not very good for Ohio State in this game. Georgia had 11 big plays, if big plays are defined as passes of 20 yards or more and rushes of 15 yards or more. And 7 of those plays came via the pass. Ohio State just never really seemed comfortable trying to contend with everything that Georgia throws at you in the pass game. And the safeties in particular did not have a very good day for Ohio State. So a couple plays here to look at. This is the the deep ball to the slot receiver here. And this probably is a play that brought back memories of the 2020 Alabama National Championship when people were wondering why Tuff Borland was covering Devontae Smith and how a linebacker could ever possibly find himself in a position like that, which is a fair question. Here, Tommy Eichenberg finds himself as basically a deep middle of the field defender. This is, I believe it's Tampa 2 coverage here. Ohio State runs this a fair amount under Jim Knowles. You have 2 deep safeties, and then you have a third player. It's either the middle linebacker or perhaps another safety kind of run the middle of the field the way that Tommy's doing here. But I think the miscalculation that, well, there's 2. One, the way this is set up, Ohio State has Cameron Brown is one of the deep safeties because it had bumped both corners over to that side of the field. So the top of the screen there, it's Denzel Burke and it's Cameron Brown. So Cameron Brown ends up playing deep safety, which is not his natural position. He does okay, but he's kind of got two guys there in his face to worry about. Sort of gets caught in between, doesn't squeeze to that hash mark to get that route going down the seam. And then Ronnie Hickman is the other deep safety who kind of finds himself in a similar position. He's just not, the landing mark there feels off. He's probably concerned with Bowers, who's number 19, kind of running across the field down there at the 50. Doesn't quite see what's happening to Tommy Eichenberg. So then Tommy Eichenberg finds himself in the unfortunate position of having to play safety, which is not his position. Runs with a route okay, but is just not a position to make a play on the ball. And it's a big gain for Georgia, who scored, I believe, 2 plays after this. And I don't really put that much on Tommy. You can put it on the call and ask, why would you have Tommy in that position? I think that's fair. I think mostly I'd put it on, well, 2 things, which I think were issues for Ohio State. One, lack of pass rush. Stetson Bennett is just comfortable here. He did get sacked in this game more often than he's accustomed to. It just wasn't consistent up front and didn't really show up kind of in crunch time when Ohio State needed it most. And it doesn't show up here, so he's able to stand in there and deliver that ball down the field for a big gain for Georgia. Getting into another play here later in the game. Now we're all the way in the fourth quarter now. This happened throughout the game, these kind of breakdowns, but they were key in helping Georgia keep kind of trading blows with Ohio State early, and then key, obviously, in helping Georgia come back from a 14-point deficit in the second half as part of its 18-point fourth quarter, which is really more like 18 points in the final 10 minutes or so of the game. They did just a really good job of kind of exploiting Ohio State's coverage. So on this play, Georgia was playing with a little bit of tempo here. Brock Bowers to this point had not had a tremendous impact on the game. Didn't have one in terms of statistical output really at any point, other than I think diverting attention sometimes and taking the safety's eyes to places where they shouldn't have been. But that's not really what happens on this play. What happens on this play is they actually lose Brock Bowers, and it's a very subtle run fake out of the shotgun, but Lathan Ransom bites incredibly hard, flies downhill. Brock Bowers runs by him, and that's just way too easy of a throw and a catch for a player of Bowers' caliber. Ohio State's offense did a good job of attacking space when it was provided to them, and Georgia did the same. These were two pretty high-powered, efficient offenses in the end. And those kinds of offenses are going to win more often than not. I know people probably watched both playoff games and thought to themselves, well, all the defensive struggle. That's true. They did. I think generally good offense beats good defense. I just think the number of back-breaking big plays that Ohio State gave up in this game was far too many. When it's getting into double digits, that's too many. And it was a problem for them against Michigan. It had started to creep up even in the Maryland game, and frankly against the four somewhat good to great offenses that Ohio State played this year. Penn State, Maryland being on the lower end of that spectrum, and Michigan being probably closer to the top end, and then Georgia being the best. These things happen far too often. So this is just, again, over-aggressive safety play, creating a void in the zone, and an easy pitch and catch for Brock Bowers for another big play. And then here is one later in the fourth quarter. This is the one-play scoring drive for Georgia that was just, frankly, a little unacceptable, I think, if you're Ohio State. And this is a play breakdown here. You're going to see Lathan Ransom is in the slot. He's matched up in man coverage, falls down kind of with a subtle move there, and it's a wide open pitch and catch. Again, not much pressure on Stetson Bennett. He can kind of really lay into that throw and push it down the field. He doesn't have tremendous arm strength, but when he can kind of cock back and let it fly like that, he can get it there. And when the guy's wide open, it's all the more easier. And this is a too easy of a touchdown for Georgia. So it's a breakdown for sure in coverage. It's a problem for Ohio State. It needs to be addressed. And it starts with Jim Knowles and Perry Eliano, the safeties coach. It starts with players, I think, kind of locking in and being a little better in these situations. But I find myself questioning the call here as well, given the state of the game at this point. It is still a 2-possession game. Georgia has to drive the length of the field, and rather than kind of sit back, play zone, make Georgia prove that it can drive it, which it had done, and maybe it would have, and perhaps playing that way would have delayed the inevitable. It would have at the very least run more time off the clock and put the game in a different position where maybe Georgia doesn't get the ball back with enough time to ultimately take the lead, or things play out differently. It was just in a game where Ohio State never really showed an ability to consistently cover man-to-man, to put the defense in that position at this particular juncture did not make much sense to me. And Ohio State ended up getting burned for it with another long pass play. This one went for a touchdown. It was a killer. I think it really kind of sapped the life out of Ohio State to give up a long touchdown of that variety at that particular time in the game. And the offense was sputtering a little bit and wasn't scoring touchdowns at this point. And Georgia was finding ways to continually crease Ohio State's defense. And then this is the last big play here that I'll show. This is on Georgia's final drive, obviously. This is not the game-winning touchdown. That would come, I believe, 2 plays after this one, or maybe it was 1 play after this one. But again, it's just another example of guys in kind of one-on-one situations that I just don't think we're equipped to handle them. And I think it probably speaks to personnel issues on Ohio State's defense. They have to find better cover guys. And the corners, I thought, had a good game against Georgia by and large. Denzel Burke tackled very well. Did not get burned in coverage all that much. He was in coverage on the last touchdown, a little bit of a pick play, but had a pretty solid game. I thought Cameron Brown had a pretty solid game as well. The safety play, I think, is what did Ohio State in this game. And again, you get a too high split safety look here where there's just a whole lot of room in the middle of the field to operate because both of these safeties are preoccupied with these outside routes. And Tanner McAllister here in the slot is just he loses immediately. Not a whole lot of hand fighting and jamming, I think, from Ohio State's defensive backs in this game when they did play in press man or when they pressed up and dropped into zone coverage. If you see here, like Cameron Brown, I think, is not playing man-to-man coverage. He kind of lets that go and hopes that the safety can help him there. So there's 2 vertical routes through that zone, and Ronnie Hickman is kind of forced to choose one or the other. Probably shades a little too much to the sideline. That's Georgia's design. That's what they wanted to happen. And it ends up being a 35-yard reception down into the red zone because Ohio State just continued to struggle with man coverage, but also just undisciplined and unorganized, I think, safety play, which is unfortunate in a defense that's supposed to be kind of safety driven. It wasn't the only thing that did Ohio State in, because this is another play where there's just no pass rush. But the story of the year, really, I think, or at least the latter half of the year, was the combination of just not being able to generate enough pass rush with a secondary that was not super equipped to cover for that long without the quarterbacks being sped up. And that's true of most secondaries. That's kind of college football. If you can't marry pass rush and coverage together, I think it's going to be a long day. And Ohio State, while it did that at moments in this game, did not do it enough and got burned far too much on these kind of big plays that allowed Georgia to kind of go blow for blow with what was a mostly very good day for Ohio State's offense, but ultimately Georgia found a little more in the form of 1 point and won it 42-41 to end Ohio State's season.